for having us here today. I get the privilege of having a fireside chat. So if we were up north, we would actually have a fireside, but in Miami, that just means it's going to be really hot outside. So fireside chat today with Mike Nichols. Mike Nichols is the Chief of Sponsorship Strategies and Activations for Gainbridge. So let's just start with letting everybody know, what is Gainbridge?
Yeah, so I promise this won't be a product dump, but I'm just going to kind of give you the high level of what our company is all about. So we have a parent company, you'll see on your Group 1001, is a $60 billion company. It has $60 billion in assets under the Group 1001 umbrella, but there's a series of companies under that. And so Gainbridge is one of the companies under that. There's a company called Delaware Life that is also under that. And so what the primary business of those two brands is selling life insurance and annuities. So typically, if you were to purchase annuity, you would do it through a financial planner, go in and sort of sit down, he or she would recommend an annuity product. That would be Delaware Life, would be one of the offerings there. But what Gainbridge is knowing that not everybody necessarily has a financial planner, has a lot of money to invest in annuities, and maybe just wants to put aside $1,000 and know they're going to get a good rate of return and have it available to them very soon. That's what Gainbridge is all about. So those are sort of just kind of a high level, but really what we're trying to do with Gainbridge is be innovative and tech forward and sort of use everything that we can to go out and find customers. So right now we're in the life insurance and annuity space, but once we sort of perfect through that platform customer acquisition, we see a lot of different ways that can go. And I should also mention that under the Group 1001 umbrella is our partner company Parity, represented here as sponsors, and so they are also part of the Group 1001 umbrella. We love partnering with them on events such as this week at F1.
Great, thank you. And if you have a chance to check out the site, it's pretty simple to use and it really is great. So I already talked to my parents about using your site, your services. So by the way, there's some seats up front. Don't be shy. I know some people like sitting in the back and all that, but right here, front row, you get the best seat in the house. Y'all want to come up? No? Nobody? All right.
We'll not call.
We'll get them up here later. Not enough cocktails to make that move right now, right? Too early. So Mike, your story goes through Miami, so it's kind of appropriate that we're here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your path into into joining Gainbridge?
Yeah, so those of you who aren't from Miami, just a little bit north of Miami is St. Thomas University, and so whatever it was 25, 30 years ago, I'm going to college in Vermont. I grew up in New Jersey, going to college in Vermont, studying economics and trying to figure out how does somebody from Vermont how do you get into the sports space? It was just something that I wanted to do. And at that point, sports marketing is sort of a career. Obviously it existed, but it wasn't as prominent now. There weren't a whole lot of programs. There were sort of three main programs at that time in sports marketing. There was UMass Amherst, there was Ohio University, and then there was St. Thomas University. And I'd known some folks who had gone to Ohio University, and I asked her, I said, if I want to get into sports marketing, which of these programs would you recommend for a master's? And she said, I'd recommend St. Thomas, because ultimately to get into the sports industry, it's always going to be about the connections and who you know and experience. And as it is now, and it was at that time, the tennis tournament, golf tournaments, the Heat, the Panthers, Dolphins, Marlins, all of that stuff was going on. So it was a year-long program, and you sort of were trying to figure out, okay, who can I know, who can I meet, what experience can I get, and was fortunate my first job in sports was actually with the Florida Panthers, and then ended up being with the Royal Caribbean Classic, which was a golf tournament on Key Biscayne. So that really, my whole career started here, so it's always fun to come back and think to myself, like, I actually did it. Like, I got a job in sports. So it's a fun reminder, because I remember sitting in that classroom looking at the other 30 classmates, and I'm like, I don't know if any of us are going to get a job in sports. So.
Yeah, so Royal Caribbean, I was a volunteer there as a college student,
Oh, wow.
so I used to be there.
Thanks for your help.
And Florida Panthers, go Cats, right? I know we got some Boston people here, and some Toronto people, so there's a big game tonight. I don't know if we'll see much of Boston and Toronto people at dinner tonight, because they're going to want to see what's going on with the game. All right, Mike, so let's get into a little bit about what you all have done and some of your strategies. And by the way, we want this to be open and conversational, and we are going to do Q&A, but we don't have to wait till the end. I'll kind of keep a lookout, and if somebody has a question, just pop your hand up and let me know, and we'd be more than happy to take your questions. But to get things started, I wanted to ask you, since it is F1 weekend, Could you share how you all are activating at F1 and why you chose F1?
Sure. So really for us, a couple things. Really it comes down to sort of three things. First of all, for us, it's relationships. So we, as a company, had a pre-existing relationships with the Dolphins. For those who aren't familiar with it, the event is actually owned by sort of the larger Miami Dolphins franchise. So we had an existing relationship with them. We enjoyed doing business with them. They always had first-class hospitality. So as with, obviously why people are in the room here today, right? Like trying to develop relationships. So it started with relationships. And then secondarily, I would say, branding. Obviously, as Mark was talking about, F1 is hot. The idea of a new event, so this is our third year now. So in that first year, obviously F1 is very hot. To do an event in Miami, do it with the Dolphins, made a lot of sense for our brand. Now, what's interesting is our products are only sold exclusively in the United States, so a lot of the value that other brands are getting in terms of the international exposure, we don't necessarily benefit from that. If in time we obviously go into the international space, that will be of more value than it is right now. But what then becomes the most important thing given that is the third part is the hospitality. As everybody knows, in terms of the people who we're trying to entertain, or everybody's trying to entertain, there are so many options. So many of the folks in the C-suite who you want to have come to your events, in most cases can do it themselves. Like in a lot of cases, if they want to go to the certain events, they can just buy tickets to go see the Heat, see the Pan. They don't need somebody to invite them necessarily. But having a paddock suite on the start-finish line, being able to entertain people in sort of a high-end experience. That for us is a differentiator because it allows us to get people there who we have other partnerships with things like, the Indiana Pacers, we have the naming rights on the field house or whatever, but again, somebody could just invite them to the Pacers versus inviting them to Miami F1, nothing against the Pacers, but they have 42 games, there's a lot of opportunities, but to say, hey, come down to South Beach, sit on the start-finish line, we'll wine and dine you, so that's really probably the biggest driver for us, because as everybody knows, if you can make it resonate in the B2B space, the ROI can be there just with one guest.
Yeah. And, it's interesting, what I've come to learn is C-Suite does love free stuff.
Well, everybody loves free stuff.
Who doesn't, right? If there's any questions, make sure you pop that hand up. I got you. Oh, you're fixing your sunglasses. I was about to call you out there. All right, no worries. All right, this is a cool one, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about this. So you inherited part of the deals that were already done when you joined the team, but one deal that you helped initiate recently was the signing of University of Iowa basketball player Caitlin Clark, who's probably one of the biggest names in NIL when it was happening and now going into the WNBA. Tell us a little bit about why Caitlin Clark and how that evolved. How did you go about making that signing?
Sure. So, it seems like sort of a no-brainer now. Like, oh, Caitlin, why don't you go sign Caitlin Clark? But it actually started last November. The Fever, the Indiana Fever, had just sort of finished their season, and for any of you who follow the NBA or WNBA, there's sort of a lottery system associated with who gets picked. And so, because the Fever unfortunately had the worst record, they had the best chance of getting the number one pick. And so at that point it was like, the number one, they have a 50-50 chance of getting the number one pick, and then maybe whoever is second worst gets 20%. And so it's sort of the Fever had a 50% chance at the first pick, and then everybody else collectively had the other 50%. So I sat down with our CEO and I said, hey, there's a pretty good chance that the Fever are going to get the first pick and presumably pick Caitlin Clark. And I should reference, we're an Indianapolis-based company. As I mentioned, we have our name on the field house called Gainbridge Field House where the Pacers and Fever play. But I said, look, if she comes here and plays, we need to have her as an asset. And so what he said to me was, he said, I don't care if she plays for the Fever or not for the Fever. We should go get her. And so, again, that looks like a no-brainer now. Last November when we started having those conversations, she was big, she'd just taken the team. She was obviously elevating women's sports, but not like it sort of has taken off with everything that happened in women's college basketball this last year with her setting the scoring record, all that kind of stuff. So it's one of those where, last year, just to sort of have that conversation, I'm not even sure at this point they're getting so many inbound calls because we obviously are very close with her agents now. They're getting so many inbound calls, but for us it's sort of an emerging brand. Now we're next to State Farm, and Geico, and Nike, and Gatorade. So to have Gainbridge in that sort of list of brands, obviously it's the company you keep. She's a tremendous athlete, a tremendous person off the court, and so great brand representative. And the one thing that I should mention is obviously from a branding standpoint, it's obviously helpful to have somebody like Caitlin. But I was talking to somebody in sort of the technical side of Gamebridge. We were just talking sort of water cooler chat, and I said, hey, just out of curiosity, like, is this signing resonating in your sphere? And this person said, you wouldn't believe, once we signed her, how many people have reached out to me on LinkedIn, what people I haven't heard from in years. Oh my gosh, when you joined Gamebridge, I wasn't familiar with what it is, and you guys just signed Caitlin Clark, how cool, etc. So I underestimated for sure the value that has sort of in terms of, you know, employees being excited, and also as we're going out and attracting new employees, and people are like, that's a brand that I want to be associated with. So that's, you know, it's been a cool partnership. Could not have anticipated it being as big as it's become, to be honest.
That's great. And by the way, one of the reasons I said yes to this engagement was for brand association for myself as well. Sorry. All right, so speaking of Caitlin and that strategy, Gamebridge has a unique approach to sponsorships, being that you focus on women's sports, which is very different from the majority. Can you talk a little bit about that strategy and why that's the strategy that you have?
Sure. So it really emanates from our CEO, Dan Towers, and he is very much sort of a Midwestern values type person, and sort of like, you know, it's, you have to do what you say and say what you do. And so, you know, in looking at our employees and looking at our customers, prospective employees, you know, we have more women as customers and employees than we do men, and so he wants our sports sponsorship portfolio to reflect sort of the values of our company. You know, this is that our spend is in the women's sports space. Over 40% of our sports sponsorship spend is in the women's sports space. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the average, anywhere from sort of 5 to 8% is where most brands are spending their money in the women's sports space. So we're, you know, somewhere 5 to 8, 10 or whatever more than the industry average for others who are spending on sports sponsorships. But so that was sort of where it emanated from. But you know, at the end of the day, it's good business. You know, so in addition to Caitlin Clark, we actually started with a relationship with Billie Jean King. So she has an international tennis tournament. For those of you who are tennis old school folks, may be familiar with the Federations Cup, which is the women's version of the Davis Cup. And so that's now 2 years ago was named the Billie Jean King Cup. So when she lent her name to that, we came aboard as the lead sponsor for that event. It's called the Women's World Cup of Tennis, and 12 teams from around the world will come together and play in that. And then also we have an event on the LPGA Tour where Annika Sorenstam, one of the greatest, if not the greatest LPGA players of all time, has lent her name and serves as the host of that. So for us, it's, you know, to have Billie Jean King and then Annika and Caitlin, who's a little bit more of a contemporary. Like, you know, you have Billie Jean, who's the Trailblazers, and really the person who put the whole movement in place. Now, granted, it took 50 years to get to where we are now, and she obviously talks about that. But you know, have her, and then have Annika sort of in the middle, and then Caitlin as sort of the young and emerging face of the brand, because again, it's a sort of emerging fintech type company. As we're trying to attract younger folks, the younger folks are following Caitlin Clark, and unfortunately may not be as familiar with Billie Jean King. So to have 3 of them representing our brands in the women's sports space, I mean, you can't really ask for more.
Yeah, those are huge brands. I'm about to open it up for Q&A, so y'all better get ready, because I know you had coffee. I saw y'all pounding it earlier, all right? So we got to get some questions. But before we get to some questions, I just wanted to ask you, out of the activations, sponsorships, partnerships that you have with players or whatever it might be, Caitlin is new, and I know that that's been amazing for you all, but what have you seen the most fruit out of from what you all have done, and why?
All right, well, so this is actually going to be an opportunity to brag on my friends over at Parity. So, so last year we sort of had a happy coincidence where the Billie Jean King Cup event, the Annika LPGA event, and then an event that we were sponsoring with Lynn St. James, who was a pioneer in the racing space, rookie of the Indy 500. So she was also a pioneer in that space. Billie Jean actually said that Lynn St. James is the ultimate pioneer because she was racing against men. So she was the one woman that was actually competing head to head with men. So to hear Billie talk about Lynn, like she's the true pioneer, it was incredible. So all those 3 events lined up in the same week, which as a, don't have to tell, as a brand marketer, is a nightmare. It's the worst, you know, and I figured it out when I was doing one of those, well, let me see what my calendar looks like for the next 6 months. And you start, okay, here's when the Billie Jean King Cup is, here's when that, and I'm like, these are all the same week. Like, just didn't even, because we inherit the dates from the LPGA or the International Tennis Federation. We don't say, hey, here's when it is, they say, here's when it is. And so it was kind of a revelation, like, these 3 things are all happening at the same time. What are we going to do to make it look like a good idea as opposed to what were you thinking? And so our friends at Parity, we have worked with them, so I'll talk a little bit about Parity. So they're a tech and innovation platform that's trying to get close the gender equity gap for athletes, right? So what they're trying to do is say for these women athletes, a lot of whom might be Olympians and folks like that who have their opportunity to make money once every 4 years and sort of monetize it there, but what can they do at other times? So we came together with them. We have a product that was launching under the Parity name that's by female financial advisors, for female financial advisors, and that event was an off-the-charts success. Just to have those 3 pioneers talking about Gainbridge, talking about Parity and what we're doing in the women's sports space, it was huge. Created a great platform so that when we launched the Parity Flex Gainbridge platform, that now we're seen as legitimate in the space. We're not just like, hey, we care about women, buy our female specific financial product. It's like, no, we're actually legitimate in the space, and we have these folks to prove it. So, certainly encourage you as you're looking and starting to say, okay, what can we be doing in the women's sports space with your brand? The folks from Parity are here, and they certainly helped us make that activation go. So it was just a cool opportunity to sort of live our values for that sort of 7-day period.
Yeah, just that strategy of choosing a lane and really owning it seems to have paid off big for you all.
Absolutely.
And about to pay off even more with the latest sign. All right, y'all, it's your turn. Here we go. Do we have any? All right, here we go. First question. Yeah, you want a mic?
Can everyone hear me?
I can hear you.
Should be on radio.
A couple questions. One, can you talk a little bit about your journey through IndyCar with Cambridge and how that compares to your experience with Formula One? And can you talk at all or talk to women in motorsports and how Formula One or the FIA or anyone has, or the MotoGP organization have reached out to you in furtherance of finding the next female Formula One driver?
Sure. So within the so we have a relationship. So Gainbridge is a sponsor, along with both Gainbridge and Delaware Life are a sponsor of Andretti in IndyCar. And so a sponsor of Andretti to begin with. So what most people don't know is I think Andretti races in half a dozen series around the world. So it's not just IndyCar. They're in Formula E. They're in supercars. They've got a lot of things that may not be a lot of things internationally that may be less familiar to the folks here based in the U.S. But we have female drivers. So we have Jamie Chadwick with Andretti, who's running in Indy Next, which is sort of that development series with the IMSA, which is like sports cars. Rolex 24, Le Mans might be more familiar with you. We have female drivers who are running in that. So under the sort of the Andretti umbrella and our affiliation with that, we have some, we've had a sort of relationship with some female drivers and obviously trying to sort of bring them up through the ranks and give them opportunity. And then the F1 Academy, again, to call out our friends from Parity, they're working with F1 Academy and doing some stuff there, I believe, tomorrow. So again, with different companies under the Group 1001 umbrella, we're sort of trying to be supportive and sort of bring forward the talent. Because as with anything, it's having the opportunity, having the seat. You can't become a good driver if you don't have the seat time, right? Like so. We've been able to support it through our partnership with Andretti, and then again, Parity doing some work with the F1 Academy this weekend.
Thank you. Broke the ice, awesome. Yes?
I'm blushing over here by
This is not a plant. I don't know what she's going to say.
No, so I was going to say, we are hosting an event tomorrow night with Women in Motorsports North America called Women with Drive. It's at the Hard Rock. We have about 10 spots left if anybody would like to join us. Marta Garcia, who is the F1 Academy champion, will be one of the panelists that we're talking with. So come see me at the break if you'd like to.
So everybody look under your chair. No, I'm kidding.
Actually, I do have a question
Yes.
So Mike, obviously Cambridge after 1001 has gone really deeply into the space, 47% sponsorship dollars here. But we still see a lot of companies that haven't yet gone into women's sports. So do you have any advice for brands that are, really overweight on the men's side? Like how, what are some of the things they should be thinking about to sell this into their companies?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, again, and so I should say I've only been with Cambridge for the last 20 months or so. So before that I was on the sales side, and so I was selling into events. So I'll take it from the perspective of having been on the sales side of sporting events for the last 25 years. And I think just so much of it's just having an internal champion. We're certainly fortunate that at Group 1001, our CEO, Dan Towers, this has always been a part of his vision, right? So when I sit down with him and come to him and say, I think we should think about signing Caitlin Clark, he doesn't make me go put together a 15-page PowerPoint deck, right? But he's like, that's a good idea, we'll do that, and then we just go do it. So, and that's I think one of the challenges is just fostering that internal champion, and sort of then when that person goes into the board, this is what I was around. So I was with the LPGA for 16 years before. So like I am very intimately familiar with selling in the women's sports space. And I always felt like we could get an internal champion and then he or she was sitting in the boardroom, and unless they had sort of the wider advocacy at the table, it maybe, sort of died on the vine. And I felt like, I'm not sure, when I was selling the LPGA, I felt like I was subjected to a level of scrutiny that my brothers up the road at the PGA Tour were not subjected to. It's like, oh, PGA Tour, sure, let's do that. LPGA, now why do we want to do this? And so, I'm not sure there's necessarily a magic bullet. What I'm hopeful for is that all of the momentum that we're seeing right now around women's sports is that when somebody comes into the boardroom and says, hey, I think we should do this and sponsor this, that there's more people at the table who are nodding, right? They're going, oh, that's a good idea. Yes, I've seen so much about why aren't we doing that. And so I've had, some folks, just reach out and say, hey, can you introduce me to the folks at Parity? We need to figure out how to navigate this space. And so I think a lot of times it's maybe that some of the brands maybe don't want to admit that they aren't spending in the space and don't want to be like raise their hand and say, hey, we need to figure this out. I think the brands that do raise their hand and say we want to figure this out are going to be the ones that are, seen as leaders in the space. And again, as I say many times, we're just fortunate that our CEO, Dan Towers, had the vision. And so really what we're just trying to do is carry out his vision. So it makes it easy for Leela and myself to get support for these initiatives.
And you're at Cambridge, you all are structured a little bit differently than a marketing department is in many other companies. Can you just speak a little bit on how you all are structured? I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, so the sponsors, in a lot of companies, the sponsorships will report up through the CMO and sort of work that way. And so our CEO, Dan Towers, is so passionate about sponsorships that he sort of wants to have his hand in it. So when I came aboard, it was a little bit different in that I was going to report to him as opposed to reporting into a CMO as most folks do. So a lot of what we're doing now is, and it's really no different in terms of the reporting structure in terms of what happens, but it's, we work with the marketing department more as partners and saying like, here's something that, okay, we're going to go sign Caitlin Clark, okay, marketing, what assets do we get that we can utilize to, go out there and sell Cambridge product and elevate the brand. So it's a little bit different in that we work as partners as opposed to our sports strategy being sort of pushed down from the marketing department. So obviously if the marketing department's saying, hey, we need to be in this space, we need to be hitting this demographic, then we'll go out and sort of look for opportunities that are hitting that demographic. So it's a little bit different in the way that the reporting structure works, but fundamentally we come together and support each other.
Excellent. I think we got time for about one more question.
Good, Paul, good lead, and Christian from Motorsport Network. I have a question around the marketing side of things too. Given your affinity with female athletes, as them being the brand ambassadors across different channels and verticals, this might be a two-pronged question for you guys as well as Parity. Who is the core demo once you establish that target? Is it the B2B audience? Is it B2C, B2B2C? What are you typically looking to acquire post the sponsorship and that sort of focus?
Yeah, so with things like with the straight Cambridge branding, that's obviously in the B2C space, right? So you've got everything Cambridge Fieldhouse, our signage there, that's living in the B2C space, our activation that we have this weekend at F1. But so a lot of what we do, and again, this would be a little bit away from Gamebridge, is the hospitality opportunities that we use, because Gamebridge is B2C, is more in the B2B space. So we've got, I'm not just on Gamebridge, I'm over Group 1001, so Delaware Life, Parity, our Innovations division. So the people who we're going to be entertaining in the suite primarily are B2B people who are not necessarily associated with Gamebridge. And then, but that having been said, Gamebridge, as we're evolving, obviously it's direct to consumer right now, but we're also looking at opportunities for Gamebridge to maybe be a white label solution. So just making up, like a company like Robinhood or NerdWallet, maybe their annuity offering is powered by Gamebridge and things like that. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag, and we're sort of sorting through that. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
Yeah, thanks.
yep.
All right, well, Mike, thank you very much. Before we wrap up, though, I want you all to know two things. One that's on the screen, and Mike will speak to it, but also, Mike is not only a sponsorship and activation guru, but he's also an adjunct professor at Stetson University. What do you teach over there?
Sports marketing.
You want to tell us a little bit about your event?
Yeah, so before I go, so we are, as a part of our festivities, we are hosting a party on South Beach on Saturday evening. I think everybody should have received an email about this. If you did not, we got the QR code there for you all to RSVP. So for those who aren't familiar with Queen and are still in town on Saturday night, I feel like if you're familiar with Saturday Night Live, like Stefan, you know, like the hot new club on South Beach is Queen. Again, I'm not even going to try to be Bill Hader. But that, would love to have you guys there. We're going to have all of our VIP guests there, and to have the folks in this room join us. We'd just be happy to have you along.
And there's plenty of caffeine for old guys like me, and for those that need that
Espresso martinis are on the menu, so if you need them, well, they're available.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Mike for joining us today and sharing everything with us.